So we've explored, we've skilled up, we've gotten our way through the campaign, and now we're at the boss fight. So what happens now?
Okay, so where the majority of the game takes place on this sort of fast travel map, the boss fights we zoom right in for and actually play a boss encounter.
Sure, that's like face to face now, aren't we?
Absolutely, yes. So what as you said, we've been through the whole campaign. We're now ready to face Count Draenor, and we face Count Draenor in the crypt below Draenor Manor. So where this boss board has come from is this is actually the reverse side of the campaign board we've been playing on. So when you have your campaign board for each campaign, the reverse side of that will be themed to the boss fight for each one you play with.
So if you want a sneak peek at where you're going to be going, you can...
Yeah, you could turn those over and have a look at and see what it looks like, for sure. So this is why this is very much themed to how we think like the crypt of Count Draenor's Manor looks like. Now, there's some other things going on in the campaign, but the boss board, sorry. So there are 9 spaces in which you can place your miniatures, and you're actually still moving around and performing an action kind of like you do on the main board, but it works slightly differently in a boss fight. So there are some terrain cards going on as well here. So
I noticed the archer seems to be standing on some bones.
Yep. So they don't want to be stood there. That's not super helpful. And there are some things, these are usually double-sided cards. These will flip over at some point during the boss fights as things escalate. And then also there's Count Draenor's coffin right here in the middle. Now, again, the terrain cards are different for each boss encounter. We've very much tried to theme it to how this works actually in the video games as well. So in addition to that, we need to know sort of how a boss fight is going to work. So the first thing we need to know about is player turn order. And how we determine that is each player in the game, when you pick up your miniature, your adventurer, you have an initiative card for that, and it's relevant to the miniature. So, for example, this knight's...
Is that what this order track
Yeah,
is?
this is the initiative track here that we build out. So this is the knight's initiative card. This says when we come to the initiative track, we go through it from left to right sequentially, and as we come to this card first, it will be the knight's turn.
Okay, so the turn order is determined by the order of the cards in the track, and this is open information?
Absolutely, yes. It's all face up.
Okay, because you can actually see, can't you? What?
Yeah, you can, yeah. So it gives you a little bit of advanced notice of who's going to be having the next turn and what Count Draenor's going to do with his behaviours. But once we've been through this initiative, so I'll just start on top with it. So we work through it left to right. Once we've been through to the end of it and all the cards have been done, everyone's had the turns, we pick it all up, we'll shuffle it and then put it back down again for a new turn order and sometimes different behaviours as well, because there's actually a bigger deck here than there's more
changing the order that people might act in.
Things happen.
Sure.
Yeah.
Quick one. You mentioned that it was suboptimal for the archer to be standing on the bones. When you first come into this situation, do you sort of decide where to place your characters, or is there like a prescribed order? Yeah,
I believe it's your setup instructions are on this reference sheet for your boss fight, and so it generally encourages you to sort of spread around. Sometimes it's prescribed setup, sometimes not, but you're generally placed around different areas of the boss board. So this reference sheet will tell you how you're going to be setting up the boss fight, if there's any extra special rules for during the boss fight. So, for example, with Count Draenor's an enrage that happens partway through, and it also tells you the kind of actions you can take in the boss fight because they can change from one to the next.
Right.
So we really
the bosses are different.
Absolutely, yeah. We want to theme them to how the boss fight should feel and play like it does in the video game, and also to make each boss fight feel different to the next one as well. So just as we use our skills on the game board to interact with things like exploration cards and events, etc., your skills are also how you interact with the boss fight, as you'd expect.
Which is why you want to be leveling up in the right places.
Absolutely, and also achieving those recommended levels makes the boss fight easier because you're going to need the skills to actually perform well in the boss fight.
Is that easier or easier?
Well, I mean, it depends. How good are you at rolling dice? What is your dice rolling skill? It's not. Yeah, mine generally isn't high, so I like to go for lots of dice because otherwise I'm not going to roll particularly well.
And the higher your skills are, the more dice you can roll.
Exactly, and the more chance you've got of passing a skill test.
Okay.
So in terms of how a turn works, similarly to what's on the game board, you get to move up to one space. So, for example, if I was going to move the knight, I can move to any of these spaces that are adjacent to. You can't move from corner to corner, but you can move across a flat edge like this.
Right.
And then once I've done my movement, I can pick one of these skills to perform an action. Now, it's not that every skill has an effect in a boss fight, but it changes.
You can't cook him to death.
You can't cook Count Draenor to death, no. But thieving and gathering are both useful, as well as your like sort of
okay, so
combat
not
skills.
Just the combat skills then.
No. So the combat skills tend to cause damage and give you different odds of doing so. So you have a melee attack, you have a range attack, and a magic attack. They all have skill tests to allow you to cause damage to Count Draenor. And if you're causing damage, we use this boss health here just to move it down. Once the boss health reaches 0, then you've won.
Oh, sure. Okay. I'll not ask ask why they're starting on those numbers yet. I'm sure you're going to get to that.
Game balance.
Right.
But so when it comes to the extra skills like gathering and thieving, we want to use a different combination of these, in particular in different boss fights, to allow people to perform different roles. So maybe someone actually in a future boss fight may have a really high level of crafting skill, and in that particular boss fight, that allows them to cause quite a lot of damage to the boss. So it might not necessarily just be a combat action.
So it's not just because obviously people can decide what skills they're going to level up on and choose a particular focus, but that doesn't necessarily relegate you to always being on the sidelines of combat, or it's not always the sort of tanks or powerhouses that are going to be relevant in fights.
Exactly that. Okay. We don't want to just pigeonhole people into this is the role you will always play in a boss fight, because that's not necessarily fun for people. Yeah. We would like to sort of give people different options of what things they can do.
Interesting. Cool.
Okay. So to take an example there, when you've got, say, read the terrain, that's your skill test for gathering. That actually allows you to move your friendly adventurers around the game board. Say if one of them's about to be attacked by a count drainer, you can push them out of the way so that they don't take that attack.
Which makes some thematic sense. If you spent a lot of time looking at the floor, then you might...
You'd learn something from that, yeah. You obviously notice those bone piles and probably go, you don't want to stand there, so I'm going to use my turn to push you off those bones so that you're not stood there.
Sure.
Another one would be sleight of hand. Now, this is one that appears... This is a slight breach of the rule because it does appear in most of our boss fights, because we think it's quite important for how you can play tactically. Now, what sleight of hand allows you to do is actually change the order of the cards in the initiative track. So that, say, for example, if it's really important that the archer goes ahead of this behaviour, then you can change that around so it activates in this particular order.
And which skill is the sleight of hand related to?
Thieving.
Naturally.
Thieving, cool. Yeah. Okay, so to take an example of how one of these could work, let's take melee, because that's a particularly important one for the Count Draenor. It says here that it is complexity 5, as we've done with our skill test before. So if my skill level is higher than 5, I can roll 3 dice, and it means I need to roll an 8 or higher, and it tells me that you inflict 1 wound on Count Draenor for each successful die.
Oh, okay. So where in non-boss fight combat gameplay, it's the 1 die achieving or exceeding to succeed.
Yep.
This one...
the more dice that roll over.
Okay, interesting. Yeah.
Now that's also helped with Count Draenor as well, because part of the equipment you pick up on the way to facing Count Draenor is the stake and the stake hammer. Right. Now, if you can equip one character with these, you probably want to give it to whoever is best at melee for this particular example, and it actually says that the complexity, when you're attacking Count Draenor with melee with a stake, that your complexity is 2 lower. And the target number is 3 lower. So this would mean that instead of it being complexity 5, it'd be complexity 3. So you have much more chance of rolling 3 dice.
Yep.
And instead of trying to roll 8 or more, you'd be trying to roll 5 or more. So that you're actually you've got a much better chance of actually causing damage to Count Draenor.
Okay.
And there are other sort of thematic elements to how these all interact with each other as well. Like there are some of the behavior cards for Count Draenor where he gets to regenerate lost health, but he doesn't if he's been recently attacked by the person with the stake.
So it works on multiple levels.
Yeah.
So having the stake gives you a sort of tactical advantage.
Yeah. So
how do you decide who has the stake?
Well, we recommend giving it to the person who has the highest melee, but ultimately we leave that up to conversation with the players.
Okay, so negotiation.
Yeah. And it's not just about this particular quest items as well. Like with other campaigns, there'll be other important quest items that will be helpful in the boss encounter. Another good example would be the Wreath of Garlic. So where the stake helps you cause damage to Count Draenor, the Wreath of Garlic is going to help you absorb damage. Right. Because when Count Draenor attacks you in return, so let's say take this Call of the Dead card, for example. On Count Draenor's turn, it says it's going to move 1 space towards whichever initiative card is to the right. So this would be 1 space towards the wizard. Okay. So this would move Count Draenor like so. And then how Count Draenor attacks is he forces you to take a skill test again. So this time it's on your defense skill. So if you pass the test, you don't take any damage. If you fail the skill test, you're going to take some damage. Sure. So with the Wreath of Garlic, in terms of defending yourself, that actually allows you to re-roll some dice as well, so you can try and resist that as part of the defense skill test. Okay.
Are you likely to end up with a situation where you've got like a group of adventurers and each person has an important item that contributes, or is that?
So it varies from campaign to campaign. Okay. So in this case, you've got 2 items you can give to players. In some campaigns, there'll be more or less. It varies
depending on the particular boss. And
absolutely.
Yeah, cool.
So one last thing as well, I've mentioned about players. We've talked about Count Draenor taking damage. We also have this health track for the adventurers. So where on the regular game board, if you take damage, that's as an individual, and you may end up, unfortunately dying and having an encounter with death. Which actually can happen, by the way. In this case, you're actually taking damage as a group. So
there's like a shared health pool.
It's a shared
Everyone's
health
in it together.
Absolutely, yeah. So cooperative game.
Very cooperative.
They're very cooperative. Everyone's in it together. So it's important to make sure you give the Wreath of Garlic to the person who's going to be best at resisting damage, someone with a high defense skill. Sure. And they want to be the person that's kind of putting themselves in harm's way. So when we talked earlier about, say, Sleight of Hand can change the order of the initiative cards, you can change which adventurer Count Draenor is going to attack. So you might want to cause Count Draenor to go after the person with the Wreath of Garlic because they're less likely to take damage.
So you're going to try and divert, and so it sounds like there's going to be conversation and sort of figuring out together what makes the most sense as to how to tackle it best.
Yeah, we've certainly tried to add an element of tactical gameplay here, and decision making, and talking to each other about how you're best going to attack the situation.
Sure, but the mechanics, like the boss fights, don't seem to have fundamentally different ways of doing combat and stuff. It's the skill test that you've been taking previously, just slightly different.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of your turn order as well, your turn is same as it's on the game board. You're going to move one space and choose an action that you're going to make. Sure. The action list is different, but you're still following that same structure. And as you said, the skill tests are still crucially important to how you go through a boss fight as well. The other thing to mention, I think, is that I said before that there are some sort of special rules when it comes to each boss. In this case, you've got Enrage for Count Draenor. So that would be like these cards start flipping over. You can see what dangerous things are on the back, and some other things start happening where he like retreats to his coffin and regenerates health. And we've tried to add some elements where once you've kind of got into the rhythm of how the boss fight works, we try to add something that then mixes it up and makes it a bit interesting, so that you're not sort of doing the same repeated pattern.
Yeah, you're not just chasing each other around the boss board.
Absolutely, yeah. We try to keep you on your toes with how the experience works.
Okay, cool.
And then once, as I said, once Count Draenor's reached 0 health, that's or you have, then that's the end of the boss encounter. Then you're on to the next campaign.